Okay, hi there. This is Melissa. I am in my temporary summer studio setup in Wisconsin, and I'm recording a couple of music theory videos for my particular students in Georgia, and they are working on getting ready to take the Georgia State Music Theory exam. So today I'm going to be going through in this video part one of the level 3 Georgia Music Theory exam at the state level, and we're just going to go through part one of level 3. So I'm going to share a screen and I'm going to show you exactly where to find that. If you look in the chat in this recording, you'll see the website for georgiamta.org. That will take you to the website that I'm about to show you. So what you're going to want to do really quick is go to the website. You're going to find the theory test that we're going to work on here together in just a moment, and you'll want to either have that on the screen in front of you or print it and follow along as I do the theory problems and help you practice and help you through those problems. So make sure you go check out that chat and the website, and then I'll also show you a couple of other things later on too, on where you can find information about where you can practice different things. Alright, so I'm going to share a screen here in just a second. We're going to go to the Georgia Music Teachers Association website. You should see that now on your screen, and that's where that link will take you that's posted in the chat. So just make sure you click on the link, and again, either print or bring this up on your screen as you are watching so that you can follow along. You'll need to have this to follow along. Alright, then you want to go to Student Activities, and you'll see Theory pops up here on the right about halfway down. Click on Theory, and there'll be two buttons. The first one is the GATE exam. You do not want that. That's for auditions. You do not want the GATE. You instead want the button on the right, which is GMTA Theory Tests. So click on GMTA Theory Tests, and that will take you to a new window which will show you several different things, including ear training files, theory test results from past years, and then on the right hand side over here you'll see the past GMTA theory tests. So they always post past year's tests that we can use for practice, and you can see the 2017-2018 theory test answer file as well as the test file. Today what we're going to work on is the 2017-2018 theory test as our practice test. You certainly can go in and print the answers and check the answers as well. And then you can also find the 2018-2019 theory test, which is not posted, but the answers are posted here. Okay, so let's click on, or once you click on the theory test, you'll get to a new window, and I already have this pulled up, and what you want to do is you want to go, you're going to find when you open that document, that file, you will find it contains all levels of the state theory test: level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and so on, level 5. You only want level 3 for this video, so you're going to scroll all the way to page 11 is where we're starting, and then up at the top it will say 2017-2018 GMTA theory test level 3. So that comes up not till about page 11. We're going to actually scroll past this ear training. The first two pages are all ear training. We'll come back to those in another video. We're focusing on the written part of the test today. So here is the written part of the exam, and we're going to go through these problem by problem by problem, and I'll explain how you do each part of the test. So if you haven't already, go to that link in the chat, go to the website, and I just walked you through how to get your own copy of this test. You're going to want your own copy handy as we work on this together. So I'm going to pause and make sure that you can go ahead and get your own copy. Okay, so if you have your sample theory test in front of you, we're going to start on page 3 of that test, and we're going to start with part 2, the written exam, and we probably in this video will only get through page 3. You'll have another video, which will be part 2, to cover page 4. So let's start with section F, and also on your screen you should see just a blank staff, and I'm going to be working on my iPad to show you and give you examples of how to write these. So you may want to have some staff paper or just scratch paper handy as well. You can also just write everything directly on your sample test if you printed out the test. If you have it on the screen in front of you, scratch paper is not a bad idea. So section F, the exercise here is naming the root of the following triads. But one of the things that we have to remember is that triads, if they are truly a triad, they look like snowmen. So, forgive my pencil drawings here. You'll see that triads have to be stacked, just like snowmen. So it's either a line note, a line note, a line note, or a space note, a space note, a space note. And that can be in either clef. So first of all of these chords have to be in root form, they have to be in triad form, and they're not yet. So I'm going to erase these, and we're going to start with the very first one. But the first thing you have to be able to do is invert all of these chords to put them into what we call triad position. Right now, these chords are not in triad position except for one. The second to the last chord in line F is in triad position. So that one will be easy when we get to it. But let's take a look at the very first chord. I'm going to write it out exactly as it appears on the exam. We have a G, a C, and an E flat. Okay? So that's how it appears on the exam. But we have to invert the chord. If you're not sure how to invert chords, I'll do a very quick review, but there's another earlier video on chords and chord inversions that you can watch later. Or you can go back and watch now. But basically, to invert a chord, we have to move the notes around. We have to have the same 3 notes, but we have to move them around. There are 2 options usually. You can either take the bottom note and move it to the top, which is what I'm going to do in this case, and put the G here. And then I'm going to slide the E and the C straight over. So now I have my E flat and my C in the middle. We'll draw the flat symbol in here. Whoops. There we go. That'll pop up on your screen in just a second. Okay, so now we have it in root form, and we have this nice looking triad here. And it looks like a snowman. We've kept all the notes exactly the same. We haven't changed any of the notes. We've just rearranged the order of how they look on the staff. Why? Because the root of any triad is always the bottom note here. So if you're looking for the root of the triad, you have to have it in a triad position or a triad form on the staff, and then we're looking at the bottom note. Once we find the bottom note, we can now name the root of that chord. And that's exactly what this exercise is asking you to do. The root, or the note that forms the root of the chord, is C. So what you would actually write on the line below that chord is C. Now, this exercise is not asking you to determine whether the chord is major or minor. It does not matter. They don't want the quality of the chord, major or minor. They just want the root name. Name the root of the following triad. So you've put it in a triad position by inverting the chord, and now you've identified the root, which is C. So your answer there is C. Okay, so let's erase all of that. And let's move on to the next one. The next one, I will put the chord up on This connection is slow here. See if I can, there we go. We'll draw the next chord here. The next chord has, again, we're in the treble clef, so make sure that you're reading these notes correctly. We have an F, we have an A, and on the top here we have a D. Now again, I know my chord inversions, and instead of moving the bottom note up to the top, I mean, I could do that, but then I have to invert the chord twice. It would be easier in this case to take the top note, the D, and move it down an octave to the D right above middle C. So now I have treble D, treble F, and treble A. Everything is in root position. I have simply moved the F and the A straight over. I've kept them. And now I have a nice looking snowman. It's in triad position. The bottom note, remember, names our chord. So our bottom note is a D, and the answer that we're looking for there is D. So we have a D triad. Again, we're not looking for the quality, major or minor. We just want the correct name of the chord. Our next one, still in treble clef. Our bottom note, our bottom note for the next one is the F, a B flat, and a D. That should pop up. So again, I know how to invert my chords, and the easiest way to invert this one is to move the F up the octave and draw my F on the top line, move my D straight over, move the B flat straight over, and now I have a triad. And now I can also see that my bottom note, which is the root, here's my root right here. Well, I sort of crossed it out, sorry. Here, let me do that a little differently for you. There's my bottom note. We'll highlight it instead of cross it out. Okay, so my bottom note is not just B. The correct answer here is B flat. You have to put the flat because that note is not simply a B, it's a B flat. So make sure that you do that so that you get it correct. Otherwise you'll have points taken off. Okay, we'll go to the next one. So the next one is the one that I mentioned at the beginning. This one is already in root position. So this one you should get right easily. We have an A, a C sharp, and an E. Our bottom note is the root, and it names the chord. And our bottom note is an A. And again, we are not looking for the quality, major or minor. We just want to name the root. And the last one in this sequence, we have an A flat, a D flat, and the F. So there's our chord. I'll give that a second to come up. And again, because I know how to do my chord inversions, the easiest way to put this chord in root position, I'm going to move the A up an octave. So there's my A, and actually it's an A flat. So I'm going to erase the arrow that I just drew here. Maybe. Well, it's not going to let me erase, so let me undo a few things. Here we go. And we'll draw again. Sometimes, you know, technology is a little finicky. So I'm going to redraw this as the A flat, sneak that flat in there. There's my F, there's my D flat. It'll look much better on your version when you're not using an iPad for the technology. But now I have my chord in root position. My bottom note I can highlight, and my bottom note is, you guessed it, D flat. So that is the name of the chord. Alright, so that is section F. Section G, this talks about key signatures. And they want you to name them as minor key signatures. So if you need to review key signatures, you can do that using the circle of fifths or using your scales. My students all learn their scales and know their scales and should be able to identify those key signatures fairly quickly, at least for major. But let's go through these and take a look at key signatures. Also notice here on section G, they have set this up for you in the bass clef. So you have to be able to read these key signatures in the bass clef, not the treble clef. So just make note of that you have to pay attention to the clef when you're also looking at key signatures. Alright, so the first one, if you know your key signatures here, and you know them by the major keys, which most people should at this point because this is an intermediate level theory exam, you should be able to identify this fairly quickly as a D major. And so if you know your D major scale, you can think about F and C sharp. And so that's the first thing that you want to identify here, is that you have an F sharp, and they've given you a C sharp. That indicates D major as the key signature. So how do we find the minor key signature, or the minor key? You start at the D, because that names the major key, and from the major key we go down 3 half steps. So I'm on a D, and I'm going to go down 3 half steps on my keyboard. 1, 2, 3, and that brings me to B. So my minor key signature, my minor key is B minor. And so the answer that you want to draw or write on your theory exam is B minor. That is the correct answer. Don't put D major, that will be marked wrong. You have to find the relative minor key. And remember, the relative minor, I'll write this up here. The relative minor, and that's always a small m, not a capital M, is 3, I'll write it down here, 3 half steps below the major key. Okay? So always make sure you go down 3 half steps. If you know your major keys really well, start with a major key and work your way down to find your minors. Okay, let's do the next one. The next one is, I'll draw it here on the staff. We have B flat, E flat, A flat. Okay? So again, you should know this particular key signature, and if you know your keys and scales, you know that this is E flat is the major key. So now we have to find the minor key. So I'm starting on an E flat. Make sure you're starting on a black key. By the way, it's also really good somewhere on the back of a test page or on a piece of scratch paper to draw an actual keyboard for this, because you won't have the advantage when you're sitting in a testing classroom of having a piano to play or a keyboard in front of you. So it's always good somewhere to draw you know, your own piano keyboard and, you know, draw your black keys. I won't take the time to do it on here, but you can do it. You know what I mean. I've taught most of my students how to do that, so you can do that. And that will help you with stuff like this as you're thinking through. All right, so anyway, if our first note here is E flat, then we go down 3 half steps. So I'm on the E flat, and now I go 1, 2, 3. That brings me to C minor. So my correct answer that I am putting on the test is C with a small m, C minor. That is the correct answer. You cannot just put C, that will be marked wrong. It has to be C minor because we're looking for the minor key. All right, next one. Very simple. We have an F sharp in the bass clef as our key signature. Sorry, that looks a little like a G, but again, technology. So we have an F sharp. If you know, again, your scales, we know that's a G major key signature, but we have to find the relative minor. So again, we go down 3 half steps. So I'm going to place my finger on the G, and I'm going to start counting with the next note down, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and that landed me on the E. So my correct answer is E minor. That goes on the line. Next one. Again, this should be a very simple key signature that you just automatically recognize and know. We're in the key of F major. So I'm going to write F as my major key just for my reference. Again, you can do that on scratch paper and then use the keyboard on your scratch paper to look at an F and then go down 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3, and that takes me to D minor. Your correct answer is D minor. Whoops. You know what I mean. We'll circle it instead of highlight it. Okay. Last one. Hopefully you're getting the gist here. The last one, again, remember we are in the bass clef. I have an F sharp, C, G, and D. That is my key signature. Again, you should recognize this as an E major key signature. So I'm going to write E here. So now I have to go down 3 half steps from an E. So I'm going to put my finger on an E and go down 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3. And it brings me to C sharp. And that sharp is super important. If you just write C, it will be marked wrong on your exam. It must be C sharp. So make sure your notation is correct, and then you write C sharp, and then you write small m for minor. Okay, so that takes us through the first 2 sections of that part of the theory exam. Scrolling down here just on my computer, and we'll get set up. So if you go to section H, we are on section H. Identify the following intervals by writing the number of the interval and circling its quality. So on your test, you'll see that there is a line of treble clef intervals, and below each line is a capital M, a small m, and a capital P. The capital M stands for major, the small m stands for minor, the capital P stands for perfect. Now let's review. Perfect. Which intervals are perfect? Well, our first interval, or a unison. There really is no interval of a first. We call it a unison. is perfect, as well as its counterpoint, the eighth interval, or the octave, is also always perfect. And then the other two intervals that are considered perfect are the fourth and the fifth. So if you have a unison, two notes that are exactly the same, or two notes that are an octave apart, those are considered either a unison perfect or the interval of an eighth perfect. If you have the interval of a fourth, it will be perfect. If it's a fifth, it has to be perfect, at least on this exam. This exam is not going to take you through augmented and diminished. That'll be at the next level. Minor, we'll talk about in just a minute, but that's the small m, and then capital M is for your major intervals. Okay, so let's take a look at these. And again, the basis for these is scales. And if you know your scales well, these intervals will be actually quite easy. There are students who like to memorize an interval chart and memorize like how many half steps a perfect fourth is, how many half steps a sixth is, how many half steps a minor seventh is. You can do that, but I find for me it's much easier to put everything into context by knowing my scales and knowing my circle of fifths. So let's take a look at the very first one. We have, again, we're treble clef here. So the first one, we have an F on the bottom, and then we have an A flat. Now before you do anything else on this particular theory problem, the first thing you want to do is identify the number of the interval, and that's what it asks you to do first, and draw on the line. Don't worry about the flat, don't worry about the sharp, don't worry about any other notation. Just look at the interval and determine, you know, if I covered up, if we took away the flat, if we took that flat away, it'll disappear in a second, we would just have an interval. And you would see, if this will catch up to me, you would see the interval of a third. It's going to be slow. Well, hopefully it'll come up in a second. So what you're going to write on the line here is the interval of a third. Now, we have to determine the quality of the interval, and the quality has to do with major, minor, or perfect. So one of the things that you can do if you want to is go through each of these problems, each of these examples, and you can actually just do the numbers. So you could do the first one, the second one, the third one, fourth one, fifth one, and just write all the numbers in, and then go back and determine the quality of the interval. Okay, let's see if this will catch up to me. So we have the interval of a third, or you can just write a 3 on your exam, that's fine. So now I'm going to take a look at this bottom note. I'm going to highlight. I'm going to try to highlight this bottom note here. Okay, the bottom note is an F. So I'm going to put this in the context of an F major scale, because I know my major scales really well, and I know my students know my major scales really well. So I'm going to put this in the context of a scale. So my bottom note F, I'm going to start there, and again, you can use the keyboard you have on scratch paper, and you can think about, well, what's in an F scale? If I know my major scales really well, I can go, there's no A flat in an F major scale, right? And I can think about those first 5 notes and think about, well, there's a B flat in an F major scale, but there's no A flat in an F major scale. And if I play my F major triad is FAC, but there's no flat for the A. But this problem, this interval does have an A flat. Well, listen to the major chord, F major, and here's the minor. How do we go from major to minor? We take the middle note and bring it down a half step. That's the A. And indeed, if we make the A into a flatted A, we have minor. Major, minor. Major, third, minor, third. So that's one way to think about this, about how to find this. So you would write third, and then underneath where it has, let me go back to the pencil, underneath where it has your capital M, small m, and your P, you're going to circle M for minor. It's a minor third. That's how I like to do these problems because, again, if I put it into context of scales, I will most likely make fewer mistakes because I know my scales, my keys, my chords very, very well. If you're unsure and you would rather memorize an interval chart, you can memorize the interval chart and go, okay, well, you know, it's a third, and I've got how many half steps? Well, 1, 2, 3 half steps up to the minor third instead of 4 for the major third. So you can do that. That's a perfectly fine way to do it. It's just not my way of doing it, not my preferred way. All right, let's move on to the next one. The next interval shows us an E and a D sharp. So there's your interval, and again, I just want to look at the number of the interval first, not the quality, so I'm going to ignore the sharp. The sharp isn't coming up exactly quickly on your screen anyway, I can see. So I'm going to ignore the sharp, and I'm just going to say, okay, I know what this interval is. From E to D is a seventh. So I'm writing the number of the interval. So now I have to decide, is it major, minor, or perfect? I can rule out perfect right away because a seventh cannot be perfect. That's only for the fourth, the fifth, the first, or the eighth. So I know it's not perfect. So now my options are major and minor. Again, I'm going to go to my scales, and I'm going to look at this bottom note, and I'm going to start with E. Well, if I have an E major scale, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. Ah, there's that D sharp. D sharp naturally occurs in the E major scale, and it may not sound very major. There's your major scale, and here is the interval of a seventh, the major seventh. Okay? So I know that that has to be the major scale, or the major seventh interval, because that D sharp does occur naturally in the E major scale. So if I were just playing my E major scale, playing it along, I would have to play that D sharp anyway. So I know that that interval, E to D sharp, in this case, has to be a major seventh. Hopefully that makes sense. And you can practice these, by the way, at musictheory.net, which I'll show you in just a little bit. On to the next one. We have again, we're treble clef. We have an A and a D. So I'm going to look at the number first, and I know my intervals really well. The number of the interval is a fourth. Well, remember what we said about intervals, and a fourth, a fifth, a first, or an eighth has to be perfect. So the answer here is 4 on the line, and then circle the P for fourth. Perfect fourth. And that's how it sounds. Next one, we have a D and an E. And again, I'm going to think about my scales. Oh, let me back up really quick. I know that this is the interval of a second. So a 2 goes on the line below the interval. And to figure out whether it's major or minor, I'm going to, again, think about my scales, and I'm going to take a look at this bottom note here that I just highlighted. I'm going to look at the D, and I'm going to think about my D major and D minor scales. Well, D major, that second note is an E. So Again, if I'm thinking about my interval chart and memorizing half steps, the major second is 2 half steps, and because an E, not E flat, occurs naturally in the D major scale, I know that this is a major second. So I'm circling capital M, and there's your answer for that one. Last one. So we're starting on B in the treble clef. We have an F sharp on the top. And again, I'm looking, first of all, just ignore the sharp. I'm looking for the number of the interval. I know that the interval here is a fifth. You can just write 5. Okay? So if you write that much, you're guaranteed to get half of a point correct or half of the problem correct. So now I have to, again, think about my bottom note and my scales. So I'm going to take a look at that B, and I'm going to think about, okay, what is in my B major scale? And again, you can use your keyboard on your scratch paper, tap it out if you know your scales. Here's B. Now what is B major? Okay, so do I have F sharp naturally occurring in the B major scale? I sure do. So this is where on this one you have to be a little bit careful, because even though the F sharp occurs naturally in the B major scale, it is not a major fifth. Why? Because a fifth is perfect. Remember that. Fourths and fifths are perfect. So the correct answer is to put the number 5 on the line and to circle the P. Okay? And you can review intervals at musictheory.net. I'll show you that page at the end. Okay, next up, section I, we are looking at drawing the major triads in root position, and we're looking at the bass clef here. So if we think about what they're giving us, they're giving you the name of your bottom note. They're naming the triad for you. So if you just want to go for points here, the best thing to do is, for the first one, just simply draw the A first in your bass clef. If you wanted to do the second problem and guarantee your points, at least some points, draw your B flat. If you wanted to guarantee points for the next one, draw your C sharp. If you wanted to guarantee points on the next one, draw your B. And the last one, you could draw a D flat. At that point, if you can just simply draw those notes on the staff correctly with the correct flats and sharps, you at least have some points. Now all you have to do is turn all of these into snowmen. It's that simple. There are a couple of things that you have to think about, and this is where, again, knowing your scales, knowing your chords comes in handy. Remember that in the directions they also said major, not minor. So first what we're going to do is build snowmen. And again, if you can just do this part, you'll get points. So I'm going to build my snowman on top of the A. I'm going to build my snowman on top of the B flat. Right now I'm not worrying about quality. I'm not worrying about major or minor. I'm just drawing my triads and making snowmen. Okay, if you just get that done, you will at least get some points on your theory test. You'll still have some wrong, but at least you'll get some points here for having drawn the triads. So now I have to go in and think about major. Okay, what is an A major triad? And again, this is where knowing your scales, your keys, your chords is all super important. I know that an A major scale has F, C, and G sharps. So I'm going to look in this chord. Do I have any Fs? No. Do I have any Cs? Yes. So in order for it to be an A major chord or an A major triad, that C has to be sharp. If you had a piano in front of you, you could hear it. If you just played A, C, E, you would hear that that's minor. Here's the major. But again, if you think about your scales and put it in context, you'll know that that C has to be sharp. Are there any G's in the chord? No, so I am done with that chord. Let's take a look at the next one, B flat major. Okay, so I have to think about my B flat major scale. What's in my B flat major scale? Well, I have a B flat and I have an E flat. So let's check the chord. I have a B flat, that has the flat symbol in front of it. There's a D and there's an F. Do I have an E in there? No. So my chord is done. That is a B flat major scale or major chord, major triad. Okay, now I have to go to C sharp. All right, if you don't know your C sharp major scale, it's okay. You can figure it out. You can think about it. You can also draw your circle of fifths, which you should know. You can draw a circle of fifths on scratch paper. That will help you out and speed things up quite a bit. If you know your C sharp major scale, you know that you have C sharp, D sharp, right? E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, right? They're all in. So your triad here, okay, is, if it's major, has to be this. So you know you have C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, G sharp. These three notes that you have on your screen here, C sharp, E, is the E sharp? Yes, it has to be made sharp. I'm actually going to move this bottom sharp over so that I can draw this correctly. All three of these notes are going to be made sharp because is the G sharp in that chord? Yes, it has to be made sharp. So I'm going to draw it this way. Here's my G sharp. Whoops. Let's undo that. G sharp. I have an E sharp. And I also have the C sharp. That gets a little crowded in there. All three of those notes make up the C sharp major chord. Why? Because those sharps naturally occur in my C sharp major scale. Again, if you have a circle of fifths, or if you have a keyboard drawn in your scratch paper, you'll figure that out very quickly. Let's move on to the next one. We have a B major chord that we've drawn the triad correctly, but now we have to figure out, again, what's in that B major scale. And B major, remember, has 5 sharps. So in the B major, we have C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp. In the chord, we have a B, that is not sharp. We have a D. Does the D sharp, is D when it occurs in the scale sharp or natural? It is sharp, so we have to have sharp there. So we're drawing that. Okay. The F in the scale, is it at regular F or an F sharp? Indeed, it has to be an F sharp. Sorry, it's a little crowded in there, but we have the correct notation now for that B major chord. The last one is a D flat. If you, again, don't know your scales, your circle of fifth will come in handy along with your key signatures. I have the keyboard here. I know that in D flat major, right? Lots of flats. I have a D flat, occurs naturally as the start of my scale. E flat occurs naturally. Is the F flat? No, it is not, so I leave that alone. The next note is a G flat. The next note is an A flat. So right away, there it is. There's the A flat that I need in the chord, because that A, draw that a little bit better here, that A has to be made flat in order for the chord to be major. Okay, that might be a little bit of a tough one if you don't know your circle of fifths and can't draw your circle of fifths, or don't know all those key signatures. So I do suggest studying your circle of fifths, being able to draw it, and definitely, if you haven't learned all your scales yet, learn those scales. All right, moving right along here to section J. This is the last section we're going to cover in this video, and this will hopefully be the easiest. It says, write the order of sharps and flats on the following staff. If done correctly, the staff will show the key signatures of C flat major and C sharp major. Okay, so we're going to do that. We're going to take, they have us in the treble clef on your exam, and if you know the order of sharps and flats, if you've memorized them, this will be quite easy. Or if you don't, you can use your circle of fifths to help you. Either way is fine to do this exercise. I have memorized my order of flats. That's my order of flats. So then in order to get the sharps, you simply reverse it or turn it backwards. And if you need to, you can do flat here and sharp here. Okay? Now, correct notation is super important on this one. Again, refer to a good circle of fifths chart if you want to get this exactly right. But if you're doing your order of sharps here first, we're doing, you have to know the proper placement of your sharps. So I have my F, my C, my G, my D. That far you should be able to get pretty easily from just playing enough music at this level and having seen it. Your A, E, B. Okay, that's your order of sharps. So that relates to this. Your order of flats, written for the treble clef, B, E, A, D, G, C, F. Okay? And that's it. All right, let me switch over to a different screen and briefly show you I know I have too many screens here. There we go. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is where you can find more practice. And so on your screen you should see, on my screen, the theory page that we just completed, and I'm going to click over to musictheory.net. If you are using an iPad, it is an app called Tenuto. T-E-N-U-T-O, Tenuto. And you'll see that up on the top of the screen, Tenuto for iOS. So if you're using a Mac or an iPad, you can go to Tenuto, and it's the same, exactly the same exercises and everything. So you're going to go to the website or the app and click on exercises, which is right up here in the top. And it'll come up with all sorts of things. So if you need to do interval identification, you'll see on the top here, it'll say staff identification, staff construction, things like that. So let's just take a look at the interval very briefly. And what you can do is change the settings. And you can go in and say, I want treble clef only. You can do a range of notes and say, well, I don't need to go that high. I can keep it within the clef. We'll do there. Change the range. The key signatures, you know, let's go ahead because this is an intermediate level theory test. So we should be able to know quite a few. You can change if you want it for your minor keys how you want it. I'm not going to change that right now. Require the quality, yes. You do need to know whether it's major, minor, or perfect. All intervals, and that's all we need. So I've changed my settings. Now this will change the exercise. Oh, we need to change one more thing. I may not be able to do that. On the quality, we do want the quality, but we're not doing augmented and diminished. So that first one that came up was a diminished. We don't want that. So here on your choices on your screen, you're going to have A stands for augmented, capital M stands for major, P obviously perfect, small m minor, small d stands for diminished. If you have not learned augmented and diminished, just skip those and you can just have it reveal the answer for you if you want to. But here what they do is give you a key signature, and I would, you know, look at major first as a possibility. And so C to G here, if you are doing it, you know that it's the interval of a fifth. Well, if it's the interval of a fifth, it must be perfect. So when you think about the key signature and add the key signature, then you have to think about what type of fifth it is if you know diminished and augmented. All right, so if you don't know those, you would have gotten that wrong. I can't skip back, but let me go back to other exercises here that you can do. If you do key signature identification, this should help you identify a lot of those key signatures. So that would be a good one to do as well. Again, you can change the settings, and you can include both clefs. So let's switch to grand staff. You should choose most of the key signatures, if not all. I'm going to choose all of them here. Again, this is an intermediate test and a lot of things can show up here. We're just going to do, there we go. So now they've asked for this key signature identification in the major scale, or the major key. So they've given you the key signature, B flat, E flat, and A flat in both clefs. I know that it's E flat, so be careful. You don't want to just click E. You want to click E flat to get that one correct. Did it work? There it is. And then it'll come up with the next one when you get that correct. Let's look at another exercise briefly. If you want to work on chord identification, this is a good exercise that will help you with that exercise that we did on drawing those triads. And so here on the screen you can see they've given you a key signature, they've given you a triad, but now you have to sort of think this through and think about, you know, what key are you in and what triad do you have. We know we're in the key of F major if we're using the major key. You can again change all these settings to make it easier. Our bottom note here that names that chord is the A. We have a C sharp and an E sharp. So this is an augmented triad. Now if you don't know that and you're not at that level quite yet of intervals and naming, again you can come here and customize your settings, and you can change some things. Okay. Now there's also I think a great benefit in, even if you get a wrong answer, or if you look at something like this and you go, gosh, I just have no idea, you know, it's okay to fail and it's okay to get the wrong answer, or you can say reveal the answer and it'll pop up and say augmented triad, and you can learn from that. So it's a good learning tool. If you need to go back and learn some things music theory related, you're going to go back to the home screen and you go to lessons. And in lessons, you will be able to select all sorts of topics: intervals, chords, inversions, all sorts of things. And if you find what you're looking for, you can go in and actually view one of those videos, and that will help you out a great deal. So I highly recommend going to the exercises and the lessons and start to find out in the staff identification, or you can also do the construction of chords just like they appear on the theory test. Keyboard identification, you probably won't spend very much time there. And then ear training we'll cover in another video. Okay? So that's where you can find a place to practice more and really learn more about everything that you need to learn for the theory exam. And of course, if you have questions, just let me know, reach out to me, and I'm happy to walk you through more and answer some questions. Alright, so I'm going to stop this video. Good luck working through that theory page, and when you're ready, take a look at another video either in musictheory.net or the Tununo app, or take a look at one of my other theory videos. Thanks for watching.